Life's gonna lift him again.
To start off, I bet many of you, even the ones from Bakersfield, don't know that Buck Owens' first name was actually Alvis. You can look it up. It was Alvis Edgar Owens Jr. And you probably didn't know there's a famous English car called the Alvis. Here's a picture. Check out that logo, huh? But the best part is what the word Alvis actually means. Turns out it's a Scandinavian word that means all wise. Huh, well how about that? I wonder if Buck knew what his real first name meant. I bet his dad knew the score. So this show isn't about Alvis Buck Owens, no. And it isn't about the Alvis vintage car either, even though we will be talking quite a bit about cars. I guess you could call this an Alvis car because this is my car and my name is Mark Alvis. But that's not the most important thing. Anxiety and depression often occur together. I know because I had them both for a few years. I took some medications for it for a while, but they didn't work very well for me, and they had side effects. One of the antidepressants had the side effect of making food taste really good. That part wasn't so bad, but I got fat. I was somewhat embarrassed when I first started seeing a therapist, but I didn't need to be convinced to go. I knew there was something wrong. I was hardly sleeping at all, and if you've ever had insomnia, you know just how crazy-making that can be. Normally, I'm a pretty confident person, but during my depression, tasks that used to be simple became daunting. I was actually afraid of going up in my attic to wire a new ceiling fan. There was no reason for me to be anxious about that. I learned a lot from the experience. Boy, did I. First, when it comes to your health, I learned that you have to be your own advocate, and that it's up to you to take action. It's your body, after all. I learned to ask for help. I learned that other people actually cared about me. I learned about building a support network. I learned about the importance of friends. I learned that emotions are powerful. I learned that mental illness, while different than other types of illness, is still an illness. I learned that when trying to figure out what's wrong, we need to first ask the right questions. Was the insomnia a symptom of depression, or depression a result of the insomnia? It took a while, but slowly and with a lot of help, I recovered. For everything we do, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we really want? In combination with what is it that we are really getting? Through the experience, I realized that almost every action we take, just like every drug, has side effects and unintended consequences. I think most of us have some ability to prioritize for the short term. Much of this ability is biologically driven, like eating or sleeping or running, the survival instincts. I'm much less certain of our ability to prioritize for the long term, for our community, and for the future. Humans are incredibly smart and have an amazing ability to make and build things. Unfortunately, we sometimes build so fast that we don't have time to figure out what the long-term effects will be. Which leads me to Mark's postulate number 1. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And its corollary, Mark's postulate number 2, just because we have always done things a certain way doesn't mean we should keep doing them that way. We've known for a very long time what the results of combustion are. For a little less time, we've combusted, that is, burned, various types of fossil fuel because of its availability, low cost, and a thing called energy density. We use it to drive our machines, to generate power, and to fly. Way before we started using fossil fuels as our main source of energy, we knew that CO2 existed. In 1859, a man named John Tyndall developed the theory that some of the byproducts of combustion, which we knew about but seemed trivial at the time, might cause some problems in the future. What Tyndall discovered is that some gases, carbon dioxide for one, have the ability to retain heat. For the most part, this property of CO2 has been a good thing for life on planet Earth. Without it, the Earth would be a frozen chunk of rock. But the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere needs to be in balance with the other gases in the atmosphere. The right amount keeps us warm. Too much of it means we cook. It's not that anyone meant to make the planet too hot to live on, but in science, intentions rarely matter. Carbon dioxide is simply one of the byproducts of burning fossil fuel, and we are burning more than ever. We interviewed Moses at the bus maintenance facility in Selma. It was only a few months into COVID, which had already had a huge impact on all of us. This was the first time I met Moses, and yet it's an example of how a crisis can focus our thinking, motivate action, and bring people together.
I always end with, what's the takeaway from this? Because that's just as important or a derivative of
Right.
Yeah. And I use that quite a bit because I try to tie those things in and learn something from it, good, bad, or indifferent. So what's the takeaway? Everything we do has a takeaway. Climate change, to me, personally and professionally, has a dramatic effect, and really it's consequential in that in the business that I do with public transportation and operating different modes of operating vehicles, whether it's gasoline, CNG, and now electric, I feel that I need to make a contribution personally and professionally in making good decisions to address the climate change because it does have an effect on all of us, whether we live here in the San Joaquin Central Valley, where we are challenged with inclement weather. The winters, the fog, the drought, and also the high intense heat, and it affects everybody. And I can tell as I get older versus when I was a young child, the temperatures have changed. The summers are hotter, and the droughts that we're experiencing, and also the pollutants that affect the valley here. I suffer from allergies. So I take now Claritin, not an advertisement, year-round. As a younger individual, I used to only take it seasonally from February through May or thereabouts. Now I take it year-round. So I know it's serious. So it affects me personally and also professionally because I have to base decisions on the bus transportation based on the climate change, how it affects us transporting people, and how we use resources. And I think the temperatures and the weather is more unpredictable, and I believe that's from the climate change, the global warming, greenhouse gases, and I believe that the particulate matter that affects this valley, because we're in a basin and we don't get those Santa Ana winds that come in and clean things up and blow stuff out. It's a sediment, it stays here. And we live in a non-attainment district. So it is real, and it affects the health of the individuals who live here in the valley. People who suffer from asthma, people who have bronchial conditions, heart conditions. We live in a disadvantaged area where we have a lot of communities that are disadvantaged. And one of the criteria is health. Health associated that qualifies us, unfortunately, for those disadvantaged communities. It's not just economics, it's also health. And that's probably the number one issue as we're seeing now.
Do you see the current COVID crisis as a learning tool in how to deal with climate change going forward?
It's probably the largest learning curve I've experienced in my lifetime, and I hope I have a continued life going forward, but to date, it's probably the hardest I've worked, the hardest I've been challenged, because I'm in a field that is for essential services. What we provide, public transportation, it's essential. We've got to get people to doctor's appointments, to shopping, even though they're sheltered in. We've got to get them so that they can maintain an independent life. Well, some of these folks are shut in. It's probably It's hard to describe because it changes every day. And I wake up every morning thinking, is this over? Was it surreal? Was it a nightmare? Is it a nightmare? And then I try to live my normal life, and when I see people wearing the masks, the 6-foot spacing, the lines at Costco, Home Depot, Fresno Ag, a lot of these local businesses, I continue driving because I don't want to be in those crowds, so I have to pick a time when it's more convenient for me, not convenience of time, but health-wise convenience. So this COVID-19 is really an unprecedented reality check of worst case scenario and how unprepared we all are, personally and professionally. I never thought I'd be hunting for toilet paper and paper towels or other commodities that all of a sudden are like gold. They're a commodity, and they bring big money and long waits in time. So it has really been as hard to describe. It's been such a learning experience that every day is different. I watch the news and I get frustrated with it. Even though people are dying in New York, California, everywhere, the sense of that reality is hard to absorb because we can't fathom that.
But are your offspring, are they as aware as you are, or maybe more so?
They are aware because one is in farming, and he works for a very large farming operation. So he's very cognizant of the drip irrigation, the solar, all these other energy efficient technologies that he has access to through his employer, and he's utilizing that. They're both college graduates. My other son, who works for a major accounting firm there in the Carmel, Monterey, Salinas area, they're very cognizant of it. And I think in their practices, that one does investments. So he tends to lean more toward the green investments, the environmentally sound investments. You may not get that with conservative investors, but he tries to do that. Both of them are college graduates. So they, I believe, have a soft heart for the environment, and they're conscientious. They read, for example, ingredients. So they're aware of certain ingredients that are not good for themselves or the environment. They recycle. They are very conscious of energy efficient programs. From what he tells me, and I know his employer, I went to school with him years ago, and the drought has affected the water allocation, not just in West Fresno County, but all over. So now they have to manage their crops based on water allocation. So for example, if somebody was had a vineyard of Thompson seedless, before they take it out, that vineyard, and replace it with almonds or some other fruit type tree, they have to be aware of the consumption of water. Thus, it affects their water allocation, and that in itself affects the irrigation district that they're in, the fees they pay, the type of electricity they have to pay to run those generators that run the wells, that run the pumps. So all of it has not just an environmental effect, but it affects the economy as well. And as we all know, California is the 5th economy of the world, given. But I think our agriculture economy is one of the most fruitful, literally, in the world. And I see it being affected by the lack of production. On any given year, farmers don't know what to expect on their production. And they gamble because they prepare the vineyards, the orchards, according to what's expected so that they can sell the crop on an open competitive market. I can go back and say, is the government doing enough to address climate change in my profession? I think they are doing that. We're fortunate because we have allocated funding for public transit. It hasn't always been this way, but we're very fortunate that we have federal, state, and local funding. We have a Measure C program, sales tax, that is running up on its second extension, coming up on its third extension in 2026. And we've been very fortunate in getting the funding for infrastructure, such as vehicles, whether they're CNG like the one behind me, or the electric buses that are out here in the parking lot. So we've been fortunate in that regard. Now, government in general, what it's doing for climate change, I don't think they're doing everything that they're capable of doing. And again, that's a political question, because it depends what party is in office at the time, whether they're implementing new policy toward that end, or whether they're dismantling old policies from a previous administration. So, you know, and that's a reality. It's not red or blue. It's just a reality check. The takeaway from this really is we don't have all hands on deck. We have limited fingers on deck. And some of those are pointed, finger pointing or allegations, accusations, rather than having all hands on deck. And that just takes a different meaning. That means you have to drop everything you're doing and deal with an immediate situation to, one, slow it down, eliminate it, and take precautions so that, again, what's the takeaway? It doesn't happen again. Or if it does, that you're prepared well in advance so that you've gotten something and are proactive to eliminate it, or at least reduce the possibilities of it occurring again. Some people know what they're getting into, other people don't, and we purposely painted them green and white. Green for environmental, but you don't have to be a tree hugger or labeled a tree hugger to really get into the electric vehicle situation. There are a lot of naysayers, but everybody has to contribute and make a dent in the system. Our effort to making a dent in the system, to making it better, is to start the conversion for electric buses. We're the only transit operator right now in Fresno County that is operating electric vehicles. There's a mandate by California Air Resources Board to transition all buses, the fleets, to electric vehicles, zero emissions, not CNG, but hydrogen fuel cell as well. We are still in the first generation of electric buses. The buses that we have several different brands, and the reason we have that is we are testing them to see how we're going to convert the fleet of 100 plus vehicles into one brand. And by doing that, you have to have a different menu item and do a taste test. And what we're doing is testing these vehicles so that we know what we want to invest in the future, so that we can get the most out of them being maintenance-free, most cost-effective, and energy conscious, because you have to consume electricity and pay for it based on the consumption and the battery ranges. Right now, everything is geared toward battery range. It's the range. So we're still in the experimental stages of that, and we do have 14 Chevy Bolts. We have 6 Zenith vans, and we have, that's the van over here? No, the green and white. Yeah, anything green and white is the electric. And then we have 2 BYD buses, 35-footers, and we have 5 Proterra 40-foot buses. I think we need to be prepared for the challenges of the climate change, personally and professionally, until the industries, all industries, get on board with accepting the climate change and the detriment that it's causing. How can all the different industries and workforces address this issue? And let's take, for example, public transportation. Until all public transit operators convert to electric vehicles, and we're giving the marching orders deadline of 2040. The other deadline is after 2023, we cannot order new buses unless they're electric vehicles. So we have our marching orders, our mandates, because of the funding. We're just one industry. We're the public transit. Now let's talk about the 5-axle trucks on the freeway that are still diesel, that are, we can't even hardly get them to convert to CNG because of the funding and the cost. Now let's talk about the farmers. Let's talk about the water allocations. Let's talk about solar energy and the readily availability of the solar panels and the cost, the return on that. And then we get into the big bad wolf utility companies. And I'm not going to name any of them because I do business with a lot of them. But they have to make a living regardless of their status. So they have to charge for this energy, whether it's solar, whether it's residential, commercial, or whether it's electric vehicle chargers that a public transit agency operates. So the economy of scales has a tremendous impact on how fast we convert and accept and address this climate change issue. If I'm accepting climate change and procuring vehicles to address that issue, but I got a setback because my energy costs are such that I can't afford to charge them, then the equation is off now. 1 + 1 doesn't make 2 anymore. 1 + 1 makes -2. So I'm taking 1 step forward, it's 10 steps backwards. So we're challenged with things that we have no control over in other industries. Until we're all on the same level playing field and there's something in it for all of us, the takeaway is going to be that we're pretty much dysfunctional in that area in addressing it successfully. We're still going to move forward, but we're dysfunctional because we're not all on the same page. And I take this very seriously, as you can tell, and with our time and effort, because it not only is it an investment, but we're affecting passengers that we transport. And also, I'm affecting the air that I breathe, that I suffer from because of my allergies. Through any crisis, there's some positive takeaways which are hard to understand. One of these takeaways that I saw in the media were some of these European countries, other countries other than the US. And because everybody's been sheltered in place, the streets are empty, they showed pictures before and after the pandemic. And what was interesting was the air quality. They showed Bangladesh, they showed Paris, they showed all these places throughout the world, Madrid, and you could see the difference. It was like night and day, literally. The darkness of all those cars spewing all that pollutant. And ever since the pandemic hit, the skies were clear. Now, it's too bad that it took a pandemic to see that visualization and reality. However, it proves the point of the pollution and the particulate matter with emissions. So to me, that's one takeaway, okay? But again, seeing it is believing it and realizing what the intent is with those pictures. It wasn't political, it wasn't scientific, it was just factual information showing you before and after. And to me, that was like, wow.
So this is a 2017 Chevy Volt. I've had it for about 4 years. And I can tell you that my gas mileage for that amount of time, I'm averaging 137 miles per gallon. That's pretty good, don't you think? If you've never driven an electric car, go try one. You're gonna like it. I think people are gonna start really very soon changing their minds about driving gas-powered vehicles. They've served us well for a long time, but man, I tell you, when I first got in this car, it's a lot of fun. And I put gas in it for the first time in 2 months yesterday. So I have a prediction to make. I've been driving this electric car for about 4 years, and I'm very, very happy with it. It has some limitations. It's a hybrid. There are now lots of cars that can go 250, 300 miles on a charge, and the batteries are getting better and better. So the reason that we're not driving electric is mostly because of range. We worry about not being able to get where you're going, running out of fuel, running out of electricity, but that's really changing. And in fact, this year there's going to be 2 or 3 pickups coming online, the Ford F-150 and the truck that I'm really interested in, the Atlas. It's going to have 400 and 450 miles of range or more, and it can do everything and do everything better than a gas-powered truck can do. So I think things are really about to change.